Okay, hopefully everybody can see my screen. Um, Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Access Management with Grouper, presented by OIT's Identity and Access Management team. For those of you who are not familiar with us, the IAM team deals with all matters relating to digital identities at CU Boulder, what's commonly referred to as identity, or identity, such as authentication, federation, MFA, LDAP directories, including the Active Directory and the Person Registry database. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Marwan Shahir. I'm a technical lead with the IAM team, and I've been part of the team since its inception in 2013. I've been at OIT since 1998, when I started out as a student employee within the Microsystems group. And I'll be walking you through today's presentation on the second half of our team's name, Access Management in general and Grouper in particular. And I do apologize for the timing of the presentation. I know it's most people's break time for lunch, but hopefully you have some delicious food waiting for you afterwards, or having lunch as this week and following along. So what are we going to be talking about today? This is the agenda for today. We're going to briefly touch upon the first two bullet points, just explain what access management is and what Grouper is, and then dive into some demos for the current Grouper version, and then also the new features that are coming up when we upgrade to the latest version of Grouper that is available out there. And I would ask just if you have any questions, to just hold them until the end of the presentation. I'm not sure how long this will take. Hopefully it won't take the whole hour, but we'll dedicate as much time as we can for questions and answers at the very end. And with that, let's dive right in. So what exactly is access management? I like this very simple and concise definition. It's basically any system or tools that give the right account the necessary access to the right resources at the right time. In a way, and why is it needed? Well, simply put, because we don't live in a perfect world where everyone gets root or admin access to all resources. So in a way, it answers the why question here. There are always license agreements to abide by, limited resources available, or access to resources may need to be terminated after some time. And that is true for both the digital/virtual and physical/real world. So for example, if a student leaves the university, they shouldn't be allowed access to some of the resources that they had access to before. So this is where access management comes in. Grouper is one of those systems that is developed by Innored2. Innored2, if you're not familiar with it, is a nonprofit consortium of research and higher ed and industry and government institutes. And Grouper was developed with the higher ed access management issues in mind. So it's developed by actually higher ed institutes to address higher ed access management issues. And we have fairly good relationship with the developers, the main developers of the product. And there's a huge community of higher ed for support and raising issues that need to be addressed with the product. So it's fairly well supported, and that's nice for us. The service for us is actually available through the domain name mygroups.car.edu, and it has several components. It has a web interface that, if you've used Grouper before, this is kind of the main interface that you may be familiar with. but it does have other interfaces that we'll also get into. It has a web services interface. This is kind of great for automation type scripting and interactions with Grouper. It has a Grouper shell. We refer to it as GSH. This is mostly for admin access. So in a way, this is not accessible for the end user, but with the newer version of Grouper, this is changing. There's what's called GSH templates. So admins can set up templates and make them available to the end users to be able to run them and execute various tasks. New to the newer version is the skim feature. So it's something that some people have been waiting for, and this being able to provision and deprovision accounts to external systems. So that's another thing we'll touch upon, but we're not going to demo just because we don't have a skim instance stood up yet. There's this concept of loaders and provisioners and grouper. Loaders are, you can think of the things that kind of reach out to source systems and grab the information from there. So i.e. a database or an LDAP directory, and then grouper converts that information into groups for the users to manage. And then the provisioners is kind of the opposite end of that. These are the ones that actually reach out to external systems and provision the information to them. So it's kind of, this is like the source and this is like the goal. This is a kind of a high level overview of what Grouper is and its components. Let's start out here at the very, like the bottom left corner of the diagram. These are where those loaders exist, or this is the kind of the grouper loader part. This is what reaches out, as I said, to systems of record, whether that be an SQL database or an LDAP database, grabs that information and converts them to groups, roles, and permissions. At the very core of Grouper, groups is the thing, but there are other things such as roles and permissions that have not been really used a lot at SviewBuilder. Roles are just a special type of groups where the permissions can be assigned to roles and then it can be delegated, and but that information gets stored in Grouper's database. So there's has to be a way for an application to reach out and grab that information and use it for access management. Then there's the Grouper shell. That's the GSH that I talked about. It's only accessible to the administrators. Users usually interact with Grouper through the web UI. And there's also the web services interface, which the users could also use, but its strength comes from scripting, and applications can interact with that through that interface. So it's a kind of a back and forth as well, where the web services can also reach out to applications and provision information to there. There are all these here that are associated with groups. You can check the audit logs, who did what and when, and by what means. There are rules that could be assigned to groups, and we'll get that into the demo part, where you can say if something happens on a given event, and the event can be either a group can be created, or a membership change, or or a group deleted, then you kind of do a sort of a if then else, and the else part or the then part can execute different tasks, and we'll get into that more into the demo. On the right hand side, there are the provisioners, and these are the ones that reach out to the external systems and provision the group information that was created here. So in our case, we provision to AD the group information. And group can also have, or grouper can also have built-in plugins that reach out directly to certain applications and services. We utilize that with Duo. We don't actually go to LDAP first with Duo. We just go straight up to Duo and provision the group information there, and that's for multi-factor authentication. Also, grouper can write to a message bus and read from a message bus as well. This is the way actually we are doing it at CU Boulder. We're provisioning all that group information and membership information. We write it to a message queue, and then we have a consumer that sits here and interprets all that information and writes it to AD. But grouper can also read from a message queue. So an application can interact whereby something can be triggered onto, or a message can be triggered or put onto a message queue, and grouper can act based on the contents of the message. So that's kind of a general high overview of what how grouper, or the different components of grouper. This is another kind of, sorry about that. This is another high, or kind of a summary of what grouper does best. Grouper is good about reaching out and leveraging into institutional data and converting it into groups, whether that be course groups, organizational groups, user groups, just of different types, ad hoc groups, or any other groups that the services that the user wants to manage exist. That information can be leveraged by projects, schools of departments, researchers, end users, what have you, whoever wants to have control access to any resource out there. That resource could be a website, could be door access, could be access to hosts, reading lists. A good example of such thing could be library access to online resources, room bookings, anything that needs access can be provisioned to, as long as there's a way to do it through either for a plugin or through the resource reading the information off of an LDAP directory or a database. And access to the interface to grouper can be done through a web-based interface for the most part. But like I said, there's also a web services part, which we'll get into, and I'll demo it in a second. So that's pretty much like the theory behind everything. We'll get into the demo here next. So if you've never used grouper before, you could basically point to your browser. Let me say, actually, can everyone, let's see, sorry, not sure if this is being shared. Can you see my browser? Anyone?
Yeah, Marwan.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So if you put in your browser to mygroups.cara.edu, you just use your enter key to get in. I'm actually logging in here as my admin account. And you get to this interface. The very left here is kind of the organizational structure of Grouper. There's some links here like favorites. You could add groups to there and make them very accessible instead of having to get through the hierarchy. There's a My Activity, which shows you like what you've done recently, and there's an admin UI and light UI. Those are going away in the newer version, but they're still being used in the current version that we're running. So we'll get into the demoing here. I have a folder created for all the demos that we're going to be running. So let me go back to the presentation. So there are several ways of creating groups within Grouper and updating the membership. So Again, this keeps going. The first thing we're going to do is create just a few groups, and then I'll show you ways of modifying those groups and doing some group math. So you could always have just a static group, which is no fun. Everybody can create a group that way. The strength of Grouper comes from doing all this group math. So you could do all kinds of intersections, complement symmetric differences with the different groups. So the thing that we're gonna demo here is have two groups created. One is a sample employees group and another one is a sample students group. And we're gonna perform different operations on those groups. So for example, we're gonna have to see if we can just get the intersection of the groups or the complements of the groups. So we'll get to that shortly. So I'll also kind of demo how to do most of this with web services. There is a Grouper client utility that comes with Grouper, and we have documentation on OITKB for those here from OIT on how to configure it and encrypt your credentials, and then you could point it to interact with Grouper. So let's get into the demo part. In here, I'm going to create two groups. I'm going to create it, and to create a group here, there's so many ways you could go from more actions, create new group. There's a big old create new groups button here. There's also from the drop down, you can create new group. We'll just go through these one methods here and create a group. And I'm going to call it demo_employees. There's more options here that you can configure. We're not going to get into that right now. If you notice here, once I start typing, the group ID is grayed out. This can be edited and changed. And we do ask that when you create a group, actually you stick to a naming convention. Usually the naming convention would be your department name dash and then the group name, just kind of to maintain uniqueness in the group naming. There could only be like one test group, like named just test in the whole organization. Also, there's code that we put in place, and I'll get into that later, that prevents or enforces this uniqueness across AD and across Grouper. But this could be changed. If you change this, this is what's the group ID is actually what makes it into AD when the group is being created or being provisioned. This is just what you see in Grouper. So it's a user-friendly name, but this could be a kind of a cryptic name. A good example that we have is with AWS, the groups have to be named in a certain way where they have the AWS account number, which is a sequence of a few digits. So the team there, the AWS team usually just creates the group name to be something more user-friendly, but the group ID gets changed to match that, and then we release that information, the group ID information, through Shibboleth. So we'll keep it the way it is as demo employees. The second here, after you create a group, you could add members, and easier way to do it is to just type them by identity keys, usernames. So I think for this one I had Dave. Sorry. I had Carrie and Daniel Weiss. And as you can tell, I mean, it takes a while. If you have a group of 10 or more, I don't recommend that you go through this exercise of entering one at a time. There's other ways to doing it. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually use the I'm going to use the web interface, the web services interface to actually create another group, and just kind of call it demo underscore students. So let's do that. There's this Drupal client, which is just as I said, oops. It's just a jar file that comes in, sorry, right here. And you run it with just java-jar, and then I'll just paste the, actually, if you run java-jar grouper client without any arguments, it will give you a very extensive online help on how to use the command. So pretty much anything that you could do with the UI, you should be able to do with the web services interface. In this case, I want to use the operation group save WS, and then I give it the name that I want to use. And it's going to be students. So it's just a bunch of warnings. And then there's a success saying that the group was created. So if I refresh this window, I should be able to see this demo students group. And like I said, if you have more than 10 users on average, you're probably not going to go through the add members one at a time. There's another ways for loading users into groups. You could do an import export. So we'll do that right now. We're just going to import the users from a file, or you could copy and paste the usernames. I feel like if you select the import file, it gives you a kind of little tutorial on how it should the file needs to be formatted. As long as you have this entity ID or identifier at the top, then you could have usernames one at a time. And that's what I'm going to do. There's a file that I have on the desktop. Just get it out here just for people to see, hopefully, and I'll expand or zoom in for you to see it. So I have an entity ID or identifier as explained in here. And then I'm going to add Carrie, Dave Goldhammer, and Kevin Foote to that group. And so I'm going to browse to the file, choose this student file here. And then you do add member, and you could also replace the existing members if the group already has members, or you could add to it. So when I do an add group here, it will tell me that it added 3 members and deleted 0 members. And we could verify that it added Dave, Carrie, and Kevin Foote. From the web interface, again, we can actually display like the members that were added, or any group for them. So let's list the employees group, and it actually here's the output of that command. It's a little cryptic because it uses the unique identifier, which is an opaque identifier that we use for all accounts as your builder. But there's other ways to format this data here. So, and this is also explained in the online help. So I can list the information by display name, and this command will do it here. So as you can see here, this is me just the display names of the members of the employee group. I can change that to just give me the usernames. So instead of display name, I'm going to get Sam account name. Oh. And it just gives me the usernames of the members of those groups. of that group. There's an option that could be provided with all web services command or with the group or client command, and that is --debug equals true. And if you do that, it actually spits out a lot more information. This is useful if somebody is writing code to interact with the web services, either Java code or whatever. It will show you the payload that gets sent out to Grouper and also the response back. So very helpful if, like I said, somebody's doing some programming and want to write their own interface to interact with web services. So that's kind of like the web services part of the demo. Let's go back to the presentation. So the first thing we're going to do is just a union of the two groups. This is very simple. It can be done, outside of Grouper. Could be done in LDAP and AD. This is not a big thing. You just create a group and add both of the employee and the students group. I kind of said here and an or, depends on whether you're coming from a programming background or just kind of saying I want students and employees, not like they have to be students and at the same time be employees. So the way to do that, like I said, it's fairly simple. Just create a new group. We're going to call it demo union group. And we're going to add to that the demo underscore students and the demo underscore employees. And hopefully, let me expand or zoom in. So those two were added. As you can see here in the membership, there's a designation of indirect or direct membership. The direct membership is just a member or a group that is added right there to that particular group. For example, Daniel and everybody else that is not a group here got the membership indirectly by virtue of being members of either the demo employee or the demo students. And you could always look to see how somebody got their membership. If they're listed as indirect, you can close to their membership information. There's an actions button here. And if you click on trace membership, it will tell you that, oh, Carrie Havens is a direct member of the demo employees, which is a direct member of the union group. And she's also a direct member of the demo students, which is a direct member of the unions group. So you could always do that if you're not sure how somebody got their membership information to a particular group. So like I said, the union group is not fairly impressive. We're going to move on to the intersections. We want to get the people who are in both groups. So this a good example would be like if you want a group of student employees or employees who are students. There's a concept of simple group, but you can designate any group to be a composite group. So create another group here called demo intersection. And once the group is created, you can go to edit composites and designate this group as a composite group. And in here, you specify the two groups, employees, and make it an intersection. And this is the second group would be demo underscore students. So Dave and Carrie are the only two, as you can see from the diagram earlier here, that are should be in the intersection group of the two groups here. A complement is the one group minus the other. So if I want to get group B minus group A, that should be the same way. Let's do it here. I create a new group called demo underscore complement. It's just a minus, one group is minus the other. So again, you go to edit composites, you set it to yes. The first group that you want to subtract from, in which case, this case will be employees first. And then it's not, and the second group will be the students group. So demo underscore, actually, sorry, in this case, let me just go back to here. So we want A minus B, not B minus A, it's the other way around. So we want students first and then employees. So demo underscore students. And we're subtracting the employees from that. And Kevin Foote is the only member of that, as you can see here. So the third scenario is to get those who are exclusively students or exclusively employees. So you want to not get those who are student employees. And since we already created a union and we created an intersection, it's pretty much, this is a union minus the intersection. So it could be done, actually, there are several ways of, or a few ways of doing this. I'll show you the group composite way of doing it. So let's go here and say we need a group called demo exclusive complement, I think is what it's called. And in here, again, we go edit composites, set it to that. We're going to do the demo union. And we're going to subtract from that the demo complement intersection. And that should get us Daniel and Kevin, as we see here. So Daniel and Kevin are the only two available. There's another way of doing this. You can set a group. So let's get demo testing 001. There's another type of grouping that you kind of have to go through the admin UI to set it. And that's the include exclude. So again, this is going to go away with the newer version, but I'll show you how you can do it right now if you want to get to that point before we upgrade. You go through the admin UI and you have to navigate to the group that you need to modify. Sorry, I clicked the wrong. It's the grouper training and then grouper demo. And this is the grouper testing here. And you can edit the group and set it to this add include exclude. And when you save this information and go back to the new UI to that same group that we just modified, you'll see that it actually created these subgroups to it. And now I don't think I'll be able to actually add a group here directly because it became a composite group by way of setting it to be an include exclude. So the way to do it is to add the group that you want to, the union group basically, to a system of record. Usually what you would do is for the system of record, you get something from the sources of record here. And I'll explain what those are here in a second. And then you kind of set, if you have any people or groups that you want to add onto this, you set it to the includes, and then the excludes kind of trumps everything. So if you do really want to exclude somebody, then put them in the exclude group. So I can do here, add a member and do the demo underscore union. And then I would say that gets me everything, but then I can exclude the demo underscore complement group, or sorry, intersection group. And it'll get me the same result on the overall group. So if I look at the overall group, I should only see Daniel and Kevin as explained here. Okay, so move on. There are privileges. The privileges are assigned here on a group. And I'll run them through them fairly quickly here. So you can set permissions if you own the group to different privileges. Admin is kind of like root. They can create a group, delete the group, read is able to read the members of the group, can update the membership in a group. So if you want to delegate the group updates to somebody, you can always assign them the update membership. Opt in and out, you can set a group and then set another group or another set of users to be able to opt in or out of the grouping. Attribute read and attribute update, I'll get into that actually later when I talk about attributes. And view is gives whoever has this privilege the ability to see that the group exists only. They won't be able to see who is in the group. Okay, so let's get into the attribute assignments. So grouping, the groups are, kind of static, but you could also have this metadata or artifacts assigned to a group that could do different things. One of them is these rules that can be assigned to a group. We have several of these that we use on a regular basis. So for example, we have a domain admin group that when somebody joins the group, it triggers an email saying, hey, this person joined the group at this time. And whenever they are taken out of the group, it also emails a certain number of people saying that they did that. We also have it set so that whoever joins that group gets automatically taken out of the group after 1 day. I think I have actually that set up here in rules. Yeah, rules demo here. So this one here, if I add, let's say, Goldhammer. So if I add Dave to here, I should get an email once the rules, and I'll show you once I get the email, the contents of the email. It says, oh, Dave Goldhammer got added to the group. There are other rules that can be applied. I have a veto group here, and I think this one is set so that you could only add groups to the as members of this group. You can't add individuals. So let's see. If I try to add Dave here, yeah, it says Dream must be a group. So you can set it so that if you delegate something, or if kind of a check for you that nobody can be added to the group unless they are a member of a group. So I can add, let's say, the demo employees just fine because it's a group. But if you try to add an individual person, it won't let you. There's another way of doing it, and that is you can set it so that they have to be a member of another group before they could be added to this group. So this is the source group here. So it's got Dave and Carrie. If I try to add someone else to this group, it'll say, no, they need to be part of that. So if I try to add Daniel to this group, it will also say entity cannot be member of demo2 veto group if not member of the demo source group. So if I try to add Dave, who is in that source group, it should be fine though. So there are all kinds of different rules and checks that can be done, and there's a whole page about these rules, how to set them up. And most of the time, we will work with you if you ever need to get to a point on setting up some rules associated with a certain group. Audit logs, this is another cool features here. So from the more actions menu, you could see who did what, when, and how. So this takes just a minute, but it should give me a list of what happened to this group from the moment it was created, and who did it and by what means. And here I'll just load in a second because it has to reach out back to the database and get everything that's related to this group. So it says I created the group here yesterday at this time, and I added Dave Goldhammer as a member to that group using the web interface. If I used different means like the web services interface will tell me that to use that as well. So kind of handy way to get information about hooks. These are pretty much you can. Grouper itself is actually open source, so we can write Java code that extends the functionality of Grouper. And we do have it. We do have some of these. For example, as I mentioned earlier, to enforce uniqueness across AD and Grouper, we're not. We extended the functionality. So, for example, I cannot add a group that exists as an object in AD. This is my username. So if I try to create a group with my username, which exists in AD, I'll say here the group name conflicts with an Active Directory object and cannot be created. Please use a different name. Another thing is the enforcement of a character limit on the name. By default, Grouper doesn't have a limit, but AD does. And I think it's like 64 characters. Let's see here if I copy this several times to reach that limit and try to save it, it says group name cannot be more than 64 characters long. So this is custom code that we built in to extend functionality of Grouper. Okay, some of the new features. Now we get into the Grouper new features. And the first thing is we're going to put Grouper behind SHIB, which is kind of more of a lot of requested feature here. So it's in the test environment, which is available through mygroups.test. This is kind of also the newer FedAuth page that we're going to be rolling out fairly soon. So this is the new Grouper interface. Takes a while to load the first page for us. This is a test environment. It doesn't have a lot of resources. But as you can notice here, the light UI and the admin UI is all gone now. Here, just to compare with the current version. So that's a very welcome addition. Everything is pretty much accessible through the UI, like just one common interface, which is very nice. Let's go back to the trying to go back to the to the presentation. There we go. Oh, yeah, let me do this. So yeah, we have one common interface. There's a new thing called there's an electronics approval form which I'm excited about actually. Here, let me go to the new interface through Safari instead. This is pretty much a simple approval form. So you can set a group, and for people to be able to join the group, you can have a simple form that says that needs to be approved by designated people. So let's see here. I have that in demo, group of features. Actually, we don't have it created, but I can create a new group here and so say, call it demo approval. And save that. And then in more actions, I go to this electronic forms, add the new form. Currently, right now, we only have like the grouper enabled one. The only thing that needs to be entered really here is the config name. Should just be unique. And then the rest could actually stay the same. The config form is just a simple HTML form. And then after that, so this could be modified, basically. The rest should probably stay the same, but it also could be modified. So once I have that enabled, and if I add myself to the admin group here. As an admin, I have to select a privilege that I need to be at. Now, if I have somebody, so once I did that, actually, I should have showed this before, but by default, actually, the groups are not available. They're not viewable to everybody. The reason they're viewable to this is because of the sysadmin readers group, which has read access on everything. But there's this special every entity group that gets added once you designate an approval form to a group. And by default, it gives everybody view access to this group. So now anybody can go. Actually, Dave, probably if you could do it on your end, if you could just request access to this group. What happens there is me as the admin, I will get a notification in an email saying, hey, somebody is trying to join this group. Please go and approve them or deny them access. And that would be available through miscellaneous, where's it at? Somewhere in here. Forms, no, subjects. Those forms. Yeah, so it's through the forms, and then it says forms are waiting for my approval. And once they've kind of try to join that group, I'll get a link here and I can go and approve or deny his access to the group. And if I approve it, he will get automatically added to the group. So that's a neat feature. Attestation is another thing that got added. This is usually helpful if you have just an ad hoc group and you want somebody to actually attest that the group membership has to be looked at a certain time interval. So if I have this demo students, I can set attestation parameters on it, and I said run attestation. Let's see here. You could edit when this can be attested to. Has attestation, you could send an email saying, notifying the owners of the group that they need to attest this group. And you could set a time on when it can be set to attest. This by default is 180 days, but it can be actually changed to a day or whatever. And once that is done, so let's see here. My group was if I set it to that, go to students group, it will say, attention, this group membership needs to be attested to, and then you can mark the group as reviewed. In the future, this will be used to disable the group if it hasn't been attested in a certain amount of time, or some other action could be also performed that way. Another feature is the enabling or disabling memberships, groups, or attributes in the future. So we can have, let's say, students, but if I want to have, let's say, Carrie to not have the membership until sometime in the future, I can go to edit membership and privileges, and I can set a future date for her to start. So if I set it for tomorrow, if I set it for start date of tomorrow, of 4/08, then Carrie will no longer be in the group until tomorrow. So tomorrow she will get added to the group automatically. And of course, you can also set an end date for her to be taken out of the group. The last thing I want to demo is the custom UI. This is something you can present a fairly different interface for a group. This could work well if you have, like, terms of services or a service agreement thing that people have to agree on before joining the group, without having to go through the bells and whistles of Grouper. I kind of did a bad job of actually configuring this interface or this custom UI, but you kind of get the idea. You can just set it up so that you don't have any of the other bells and whistles that Grouper has. And this way, this is like a sample consent thing, and people can just go in. You could send them just a link directly to this page, and they could hit like agree, and the actions performed by the agree button can also be customized as well. The last thing I want to talk about is the GSH templates. These are, like I said, GSH things are only accessible to admins of Grouper, but things can, like rules and other advanced operations, can be made available by configuring a template and then designating who can run this template and on what groups or what set of users it can apply as well to. And then there is also Skim, which is a welcome addition. This will help with provisioning and deprovisioning of external systems. I think it's called Slashdot as one of the things that have that supports Skim. I don't know if Jason Umberster is on the call, but he's asked for Skim for provisioning to AWS, and there are other use cases that this could be helpful in. So I think that's all I actually wanted to demo. There's a lot more out there. More than happy to answer any questions that you might have. So let's get started. Let's see who has questions. I think Delan has a question.
Hey, Marwan, how are you doing?
Doing well.
Good. I just had a quick question. You mentioned that the exclude and includes feature is going away. Is it just going away? Is the admin interface going away, or is that?
Yes. So no, it just has the admin interface. So the way to do it in the new interface, here, I'll show you how to do it. Let's see my groups. These artifacts are all pretty much just attributes that get assigned to a particular group. So the way to do it in the new interface is to go to the particular group that you want to assign. Let's say students, and you assign attributes to it, and you can assign this, search here for include, exclude. And once you do that, that group will become a type include exclude. Sorry, like I haven't configured it for that just because of the hooks actually come into the way. But that's the way to do it, is to go through the attribute assignment.
Thanks, Marlon.
Oh, and we'll make that available as well in the documentation for future reference. Any other questions?
I've got a question. That web service interface, is there an API published for that? I went over the internet too to look for it.
There might be actually out there. I would have to dig up the links for more information about like what commands are supported, but having that grouper client actually exposes a lot of the commands or a lot of the interface of the API. And we have that documented in OITKB, by the way. So.
Right, thank you.
Kevin, I just posted a link over in the chat to that. And just a heads up for others too.
Right on, thanks.
And the other thing we also use Grouper for that's not so obvious. Like, so most of this stuff is, most of the group management gets provisioned into AD, and then we expose that through Shibboleth as well for external applications. One thing I wanted to show here is the source of records. These are groups that get loaded on a regular basis from the enterprise database. So we have affiliation information available. We have departmental information also available. This is all information that gets updated in the HR system and makes it into our enterprise database, and then Grouper reaches out and makes this available on a regular basis. Another thing that we have discussed is making course information available as well. The good thing that Grouper provides is the privileges by default is nobody has access, so we can lock it down there for purposes, and then we can provision it to a system that needs it, as long as there are also securities in place to make it not being exposed to everybody. So hopefully we'll get that going sometime in the near future.
Aren't we getting requests for using the course groups?
We do right now. I think we're kind of exposing it through SHIB directly by having SHIB going to the enterprise database directly, but it'll be nice to have it available here. That way we can have, let's say, professors be able to add or exclude people from their course roster. So we kind of delegate all that management to the service owners, and they can modify their groups any way they want. Because after all, we don't know how you run your group or your service. So it's always, we always delegate the management of that to you. You know better how the service should be run. So
right.
Yeah. Any other questions? I have chats in here. Sorry, I'm not watching the chat window. And it's 1 o'clock. If anybody wants to drop off, I'll stick around for a little bit to answer any questions, but feel free to drop off if you have other commitments or if you want to get lunch. Thank you all, and I'll stop the recording actually. So, and I'll make it. I'll make the link available for this to be viewed at a later time for those who couldn't make it.